webinar series, and I know many of you have been to a number of these programs, and they are sponsored by Sun, Microsoft, and Oracle. We have our next program coming up on June 5th, so I encourage you to mark your calendars now to plan for that, because we've heard that you have enjoyed these so much that you'd like to be able to plan ahead for those. And for anybody who has questions on the Software Development Forum, I'm more than happy to answer those. We are a nonprofit resource center for developers and entrepreneurs. We have over 20 to 30 events every month and 2,000 members. For those of you who were at Stanford and had the opportunity to plug into programs like this all the time, we kind of provide that same service to the Silicon Valley community at large. We have programs that work from San Jose to San Francisco. So please let me know if I can answer any questions about those. We have a fabulous panel tonight and a fabulous program. And foremost among those is our moderator, Professor Urs Rosbeck. His reputation precedes him. For many of you, he is quite well known. He was one of the co-founders of Continental Cablevision, which makes him a particularly appropriate moderator for today's event on whether to go solo or to partner. He is currently a lecturer at Stanford, and I will let him introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you. Well, I have to tell you, those of you who went here will understand this, but I came here in 1985, and tonight, for the first time, I'm fulfilling a dream. I'm eating in class. Our format is that each of our panelists is going to talk for a few minutes about a subject that they feel close to, and then we'll perhaps have some crosstalk among the panelists, and then we'll promptly open it up for your questions and comments. We hope to dig down a little tonight and get away from platitudes about how partnerships are wonderful and 1 + 1 = 3 and all kinds of things like that, because we all know that though 2 can be better than 1, 2 can pose problems that 1 alone does not have to confront. And we'll try to get to some of the subtler issues and some of the nuances about partnerships, and would welcome your inputs as well as your questions. So let's begin with Doug Kerr.
Thank you. I'm going to presume that many of you are starting or would like to start companies. I'm a psychologist and an organizational consultant, and that is a position where I'm usually able to find out a fair amount about the person I'm talking to and then have something that's much more tailored to their situation. And so this is kind of shooting at the median, and I'm assuming the median is are now or would like to start a company and would consider seriously having a co-founder. I'm going to use the term co-founder rather than partner. It's just less confusing to me. That's the only reason. In thinking about this, I noticed that the questions seem to focus on the chemistry between co-founders, as if personal attributes or idiosyncrasies that might cause problems between them. One is messy, one is neat. One uses Windows, one uses Macintosh, something like this. And there is an answer to that question that I was posed, which is what are the more common problems and how can they be reduced by selecting the right partner? There are some perspectives on that, but I want also, before getting to that, to pose a different way of looking at it, which is not so much personal attributes in the sense of characteristics that you can picture causing some degree of friction between the parties, almost no matter what they were doing. You know, they're both very controlling and would have trouble choosing a restaurant, never mind running a company or something like this. There's another perspective that's less personality-based, and that is simply predictable events, critical events in the life cycle of the company, about which they may have different, again, values or perspectives, and that can't be predicted. The differences can't be predicted from knowing their personalities that well, and the major solution is to make sure you have conversations about certain salient issues, at least the ones I've seen people run aground on. And I hope later to mention some of those briefly. Looking at the personal attributes side of this and the personal chemistry, one important step, if I may be so bold, is the possibilities for difficulties are almost endless. The analogies to marriages are obvious. How many different ways can two people have difficulties and run across each other's differences that are in ways that are problematic? There are people who do professional profiles of individuals, and if you were seriously thinking about teaming up with someone, I would commend that as a possibility to look into. It gives a sense that you will recognize concerning yourself, but may learn a lot about the other person, and organize the self-perceptions that you already have in a way that's more usable concerning your problem-solving style and strengths, how characteristically you're likely to handle other people, including the other founder in a business, what your management style is likely to be like, and where that might fit, where it might, based on the nature of the business you're entertaining going into, and how well you know yourself. That's one, and these render a somewhat more in-depth and high-fidelity view than the sort of homebrew Myers-Briggs kind of thing, and are commensurately more useful. If I had, however, to commend one attribute that you had to look for in a co-founder, it would be a kind of intelligent open-mindedness, an intellectual honesty, quickness to admit that he or she is wrong or was wrong in their analysis of a situation, a constant scanning for new information. We all have our examples of the risks of being closed to new information, as in American Automotive's early response to Japanese imports or IBM's early response to distributed computing. But to my experience, more importantly, it's not just risk management, it's the fact that a startup's principal advantage frequently in competing against a better capitalized competitor is the ability to see something faster and then implement it faster than they, and look for someone who has that. Whether you have it or not, it's frequently worth its weight in gold in the environment where you can exploit it. And even if you or your co-founder are not true visionaries, this ability, this intellectual stance often can help to make up for it. The co-founder you choose, however, is only half of the active ingredients in this reciprocity, and a major question is how well do you actually know yourself? To the extent that you do, you can think with some predictive accuracy about how you're likely to get along with a person of this or that type. But if, again, I'm talking to people who may not have been in business settings a lot, or business settings in which they didn't get a regular stream of high-quality feedback about your performance, then there's some reasonable chance that you don't see yourself as others would who had the ability to observe you in a business setting. And it would be worth thinking about who is there who knows the answer to the question, what do you think I would be like as a partner or as a co-founder in a relationship where the authority is fairly evenly distributed? How do you think I would handle that? Offer that person a very good lunch and get a nice long stretch of their time to get them to approach this question thoughtfully. You're asking a lot of them, and don't forget the thank you note afterward, because you'll be quite lucky and ought to be flattered if you get a really detailed answer. But absent that kind of feedback, for someone who hasn't been running a business or in a business a whole lot, that that kind of corroboration of your impressions of what you're likely to be like running a company is vital. Failing that, ask yourself characteristically, what kind of feedback have you gotten over the course of your lifetime, and particularly, how often have you been thought of as stubborn, or maybe even closed-minded a little bit. Those are red flags on the track. If that's been said, regardless of how easy it was at the time to dismiss it, the stakes will be very different if you don't look into it and then go into a situation not realizing that if it's true. So let me turn to what I think are some of the things I see businesses trip over because the two parties haven't talked about what they think about these things. Just as a list of possible topics for your potential partner and you to review, I think one thing that is a predictable phase in the growth of the business and for which people are not always prepared is the move from everyone does everything, speed is a virtue, to the gradually increasing need for system and process, and how much and when and how much is too much, and do either of you have an allergic reaction to system and process? That would be worth knowing about. The jobs of executive team members outgrowing them. These will be people by this time you will have worked with and have, because they're closer to you in the pyramid, if for no other reason, will have a greater sense of personal connection to. It happens very frequently that the jobs of people outgrow them in a rapidly growing company. You and your co-founder might benefit from talking about how would you go about handling that, not the least of which is your respective jobs outgrowing you. Who will and how will someone say something when the emperor is getting too scantily clad with regard to either you or your founder and your abilities as the job requires them? Another one that may not pertain, but I've seen be a real stumbling block, the acceptance of very large payments for very large alterations to your product. What is a detour? What do you two think a detour from the business plan looks like, really? What's the balance on the way to productizing, and when do we actually end up accidentally in a job shop? The pull and push between product quality and scalability on one hand versus time to market on the other is one of, especially in software, is one of you very focused on replicable procedure. We know who did what to the code. We know when it happened. The thing is documented. It's not inside the head of a brilliant founder who may leave, etc. And the other may be very eager to get this product out. That's a friction point that you might want to talk about. How soon should the second product be out, and how soon should real resources be put into it? Is a source of some conflict when people disagree about how urgent is getting the next thing out. Do you and your partners see the business, do you have agreement in seeing the business as a largely, if either characterization is apt, but I've seen this become a point of conflict, a largely technologically driven business where we will succeed because this is a genuinely better mousetrap, or a marketing sales driven business, and do either of you have a slight tinge of condescension toward people in the opposite discipline, that you can run aground on. And lastly, the exit strategies, personal exit strategies and company exit strategies. Is one of you absolutely heart set on building a lasting company, and the other one is interested in liquidity, and how are you going to reconcile that? What do you picture the alternatives? When would you think, regardless of your dreams, that selling the whole thing would make sense? Under what circumstances could you picture that? Because one of you may picture it very differently. So the last advice is, if you can avoid having a co-founder who has very equal authority to you, avoid it. It's a very hard way to run anything. Take a close look at the smaller accounting firms you know, the smaller law firms you know, and I don't wish to precede any comments here, but the smaller venture firms that you know. It is a very hard way to run a business when authority is genuinely equally distributed across the players, and when really important decisions come around. Any partnership, the real term partnership, comes time to decide the partnership payout or the carry or this or that. These are very difficult decisions, and they are very difficult because there is no diplomatic and gracious use of authority to be made. Authority, diplomatically and graciously used, is a wonderful lubricant to getting stuff done, and moving more toward a let's do something and then correct rather than paralyze ourselves trying to figure out the perfect solution now. If you can avoid opting for a structure that is in miniature a horizontal organization, do it. Have the co-founder come with you, have clear roles, but be clear about which of you, if you can do this, be clear about which of you really would be the better CEO, and have clear understandings based on that. It makes life much more efficient and minimizes. It's a good way to manage risk. Getting into a horizontal thing is tantamount to taking on, if you can avoid it, you have taken on unnecessary risk. So I don't know did I do my 8 minutes here?
Well, you did it in spades, and thank you very much.
Yeah. That's what I was afraid.
Matt?
Okay, I'm going to talk about, I only have one partner experience. I'll just give you a history of how I worked with the co-founder of my business and how we're going to be working together again, and then just some general points about how we did what we did and why we did it and why it seems to be working so far. I partnered with a classmate of mine from business school here. I graduated in 1993, a guy named Mark Selko. We met here, became friends, and one of my goals was I knew I wanted to start or buy a business, basically just run a business, and that I knew I couldn't do that on my own. So one of the things I came to school looking for is figuring out how I could do that, what skills did I need, but also ideally if I could find the person, that would be great. And it worked out for me that way. Mark and I, after school, went off and took different jobs in different cities, but 3 years later reunited to start a company called BabyCenter, which is the leading online information source and product retailer for new and expectant parents. We built the company and ran it together for about 3.5 years. About 2.5 years into it, we sold it to another company, and we stayed on until we really started integrating throughout the company that we sold to. And about a year ago, we left. Took some time off, and actually we've teamed up again. We've created a group called Merced Partners, which is an investment firm and buyout group. We're looking to find small businesses to buy that we can take active roles in running. So what I hear from people is, wow, you guys survived. You were friends going in, which is rare. You survived that. You did well with the business, and you're teaming up again. So I'll talk a little bit about how that came to be and why I think that worked for us. So first, I just from a personal level, in starting or running a company, I made the decision, do you need a partner or not? And I just knew constitutionally I was the type that would need to start with a partner. I always do better in teams. I like to bounce ideas off other people. I like someone to give me some impetus when I need it. I like having someone there to turn off the lights with me when a company was going. So I knew pretty much that I needed to start with a partner. And then I think to talk about the cliches, as Irv said, I mean, you're looking for someone with similar values and outlooks, but different skills. And so I think that general pattern held with us, and I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of that. I think first on the values and outlooks, what I found is it's helpful to quickly get beyond the platitudes of, what do you want to do at some high level, but really explore the corner cases of what does it mean to have a shared outlook. I think values are a little bit more, you can just talk in fundamentals. We both trusted each other. We saw enough of each other operating, at least I could say that he was a person of high integrity, intelligence, and the like. But when we talked about, what's our outlook, what do we want to achieve in a partnership, we went down a lot of these corner cases that Doug was talking about. What do you want? How much do you want to build a company? How much, how important is money to you? What happens if, how important is your role to you? It wasn't like we were looking for a particular answer, but we just did that over a period of a couple of years, really, as we were talking, planning working together again. Working together, and you just start forming a judgment. Okay, I see how they're approaching things. I can see where we might have issues. I can see where we won't. And we just concluded that we did have enough of a shared set of understandings of what we wanted to achieve. And then on the skill set, we were lucky in that we had some different skills. And at a core level, I was basically a product guy. I worked a lot with operations in my background. I was a kind of led product teams and kind of made things happen. And he had that rare skill, which is very successful in a business, that I didn't have anywhere near as well as he did, which was the ability to sell. And so going into our partnership, we said, great, I'm the product guy, you're the sales guy, and that's a good start of making a business successful. So we chose to work together, and let me talk about some of the things that I think went well when we were working together, and then some of the areas where we started to have conflicts or potential conflicts. First, the main thing is started getting a business off the ground and growing is just incredibly difficult to do. And I found the best thing about having a partner was that ability I just felt like I could put my back to his, and I didn't have to worry about what was happening behind me, and we could just go out and take on the rest of the world. And so we talked a lot about that, and also about dividing and conquering, that we really could say, okay, whatever the problems are, I can handle this one, I'm going to go do that. And he could trust me to handle those things and just make them happen and check in with him where I needed to, and I could certainly trust him to do the same. So we felt like we had two people working together, and we never had to second guess the other person's motives, intent, integrity, and the like. So how did we stay in sync as things went on? What we found is that the thing we did most was we just ran information by each other constantly about big picture things, but also about a lot of the details. Just how do you, hey, I'm thinking about hiring this person, and this is a decision I can make, but what do you think about structuring an offer this way or that, or you having an issue with an employee and you want to tell them to do something? Just the littlest things. Is this we need to lease our first copier. I've never done that before. Do you think this is a reasonable price? And you just find by sharing information on a lot of different levels, it helped you stay in sync and really start to see, again, where you have differences and where you have similarities. So you could trust each other and then learn how to develop that sense of, okay, this is something I can just do on my own. We're not going to have issues, versus this is something where I need to check in. And then the thing we did do is we made most very big decisions together, and we made sure we left extra time. It is harder for two people to do that, so we would have more sessions than it would take to make really big decisions about how much should we spend on marketing here, or how quickly should we raise money now or later. And a lot of those times we had a lot of discussions behind closed doors late at night, just hashing that out. And last thing I think that we found is we were both, we're probably on that edge of, we're both stubborn and headstrong people, which I think is important in someone who's going to start a company. You have to have some conviction around what you do, but you have to learn to check it so that you don't get into dysfunction. And we found that we both would get to the point where, we'd push and push and push and fight and get annoyed with each other, but then one or the other would finally say, okay, it's not, fine, we'll do it your way. And we were luckily about in balance in terms of how we did that, and I think that was pretty helpful. The other thing is I was the CEO and he was the president. We got into some of these things where we really wanted to co-run the company, but there were, the first people told us as soon as you're going to go out and raise institutional money, you're going to get that question. And we, so for a variety of reasons, I had more skills that fit with the company that we were doing. I had managed larger teams, so I became the CEO and he became the president. But then we split up the roles where we really were to each other co-running the company. Again, all big decisions would be made in consultation with the other person. And what we did is we divided up it wasn't like one person got all the glory and all the fun stuff and the other person got all the hard work. So while I was the CEO, I was also in some ways the COO too. So I had to take care of a lot of the details and make things happen that some of the stuff that he chose not to focus on. So we had a balance of kind of the dirty work and the glamour work that was pretty helpful. So I guess that gives you a good sense overall, hopefully, or you can ask questions later about how we worked together and some of the secrets that we had to making it work. And I will add one other thing that was interesting is we sold the company and then we were operating as a division of another company. And one thing that I noticed is that sort of two in the box, people co-running a company, keeping it somewhat loosey-goosey was just pretty much almost impossible, at least in the company that we sold to, which was a fairly traditional company. It worked for us throughout the course of the year that we stayed in that company. We didn't change our structure, but I could see, companies, when you're running a division autonomously, they really do rely on single point of accountability and contact. And so I think it was just a variety of factors that allowed us to escape that. But I think had I stayed on, or both of us, for another year, I think we really would have gotten to that point where we'd say, okay, this partnership has got to change, and we've got to figure out what that is. Earlier stage, I think you can take advantage of those differences of, hey, there's two guys, titles aren't as important. We can figure it all out. And I'll end. I was just reading some W.H. Auden, the poet, this weekend, and I saw a little poem that he had that said something like, when truly brothers, they sing not in unison but in harmony. And then I was coming in here and I realized that probably sums up in a lot fewer words the power of partnership, that you're not looking to do, for clones who do the exact same things. You're looking for two together who make more beautiful music than you can make on your own.
W.H. Auden was thrice divorced.
Maybe I guess that's why he said when truly brothers and not when truly spouses.
He's learning.
Thank you, Matt. Peter?
Thanks. Does everybody here know what the questions are that we're responding to?
No.
No? Okay.
That's part of our mystery.
It's working well. And the questions that I was to start off with was, as you look back at your experience with your partner, what lessons do you take away? And would you choose to do it alone or partner with someone if you did it again? How many people, show of hands, know sort of what my background is?
They distributed biographies.
So you've got some sort of biographies. I had a partner in a search fund that was successful in buying a company, and he left the company under some pressure after about 2 years in the company. And so from that point, the partnership maybe wasn't successful, sure, but it was perhaps successful, could be viewed as successful early on. And then I'm just curious about the audience a little bit as we talk. How many people here are thinking about starting companies or have in the last year started a company? And how many people here are thinking about buying companies? Maybe this is some crossover to buying companies or have recently bought companies that were already going. Okay, so a lot more starters maybe than buyers, but that may be changing with the economy a little bit. So to address the question as I look back, what lessons do I take away? Just a couple I think I would add to what Doug and Matt said before about a partnership, though I would say choosing someone, to me, the criteria that I used was to look for somebody that I respected and liked. I liked so much that I wanted to spend a lot of time with them, and that I respected so much that if I fought with them, afterward we could still work together and make decisions well together. I think that's still a good criteria. Though I'm not sure if you should listen to me for how to choose a partner or how to lose a partner. But I think both are somewhat relevant. And I also think you should choose someone you know well. I think Matt maybe said a long courtship outside before the session said a long courtship is important. I think that's very helpful if you can have a long courtship with a partner, because you just know a lot, and if you can have been through different stages of life and success a little bit with them, it increases the chance of it being a successful collaboration. Talking through the issues, as Doug mentioned, I think are important, and to some extent it doesn't even matter what the issues are, though you may as well hit the important ones while you're doing it. But how you resolve those issues, of course, is critical. I think people have thought about that before, so that may not be new. And I won't say any more on choosing a partner. If there are other questions, I'd be happy to talk about them. But just on dissolving a partnership, I think that's a very difficult thing to do, as you would imagine, and having good outside advice on how to do that is critical, because it's hard to have perspective when you have someone with whom you've worked and who's also a friend. And I had a very good board that was helpful in that. But just outside advisors for both of you, I think, is important. And I think actually, though it sounds sometimes a little trite, that transitions like that can be very positive, though they don't seem like it at the time. And I think looking back, that transition was very positive for me and very positive for my partner. I think every time a door closes, another one opens is a very good analogy for that. And I think, though our transition was difficult at the time, it's been really a very good one all around. If you think you might have to split up the partnership, you do, just about unequivocally, because I think nobody wants to go that direction. And I think there are some analogies to marriage that work, but in that regard, I don't think that's a very good analogy to marriage. So I think when things get tough, it's different than a marriage, and you should not look at it like that, and you probably should think about how to split it up and make things better, especially in a company when you're a new manager. For me, along the whole my progression with my company and as a manager, the biggest challenge has been just raising the hurdle for the quality of people, their performance, and their effectiveness in interaction. And I think with my partnership, we got to the point where we understood where the effectiveness of the interaction just wasn't good anymore, wasn't good enough anymore for the situation. Having said all that, I think you should, in dissolving a partnership, give your partner time to adjust to the idea and adjust to the new life circumstances as best you can, given the condition of the company that you're in. And having said all that, I think whether you do it with a partner or not is really a very personal decision. It's up to you. And I think I was thinking if there is a correlation between the partners or the people I know who have started search funds and bought companies and success between doing it as a partner or not. And I don't see a correlation with that. And Irv, you might have noticed.
There's a very slight correlation of success with partners versus single operators, but it's not, the sample size isn't very big, and it's not a very big difference.
And that's interesting, because I would have guessed that from my even smaller sample size. And I think it can be a great way to go. If I did it over again, I would not do it. If I did it now, as I hope to do it again at some point, but not until my current company is much more successful even, and we're doing well now. I would do it by myself, absolutely, no question about it, partly because I have a bigger skill set and more confidence, but also I think it's just a better way for me to operate. If I did it again, if I went back in time, I don't know if I'd do it the same way. I think to a certain extent it's a security blanket to do it with a partner, and I probably didn't need that security blanket as much as I thought I did. So I don't know if I'd go back and do it with a partner again, but I think it can be effective. Someone was talking with some folks beforehand, and they led up to the question of sort of, do I favor doing it with a partner or not? And I think as an investor, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this, I would slightly favor doing it investing in someone without a partner. I think it's very personal. It depends on the people, and you have to assess yourself, as Doug said, first of all. But I would slightly favor doing it without a partner. If you think you might do it without a partner, I would absolutely push you in that direction to do that, because you're probably, part of the reason you want to do it with a partner is just to, probably like me, as a security blanket.
Great.
Turn it over to you.
Michelle?
Okay, my name is Michelle Steckline. I work for Thompson Clyde Venture Capital. We're a venture firm that has offices here, London, and Paris, and the funds have been around for 22 years. And I did make some attempt to get the collective wisdom of the group versus just my opinion on the question, which I was asked to comment on, which is when an entrepreneur or founding team approaches you for funding, do you view one model as better than the other? And what characteristics are you looking for in order to invest? Which is a little bit general. So I thought it might be a little fun to start out with something controversial. Given that we're sitting here at the business school, there is a little saying that occasionally migrates through the venture community, which is never do a deal where the founding team is a bunch of business school buddies. And that goes completely against what Matt's learning is, by the way. So it may not be a rule to live by, but why might that saying be out there? I mean, in one sense, it says, look, it's quite possible that the skill set is too narrow or that the skill set is redundant. It might be that there's a groupthink issue that you have to worry about a lot as an investor. And there's also an issue here about have these guys ever worked together in tough times? Because, it's easy, or easier, I would say somewhat easy, to keep a team together when things are rocking and rolling. But my fear is what happens when it starts rocking and starts rolling to the side, which is what we see a lot of companies do. They get off to a great start, and then you kind of start to make this sideways path before you move forward again. If you haven't worked together in difficult times, you just had fun together as business school buddies, you don't really know how you're going to act in those tough situations and how you're going to react to each other. And so that might be why some of those sayings are out there, and that also speaks to some of the comments that you heard both Doug and Matt make. Now, if I were to broaden my answer, I would say this isn't a defining issue from an investment sense. On my list of things is not whether the team is a co-founding team or not. There is an issue there about whether there's a team, but that can be a founder plus team as well. But this isn't a defining issue. In my opinion, either way can work. Either way also can't work, and the devil is in the detail, which I think is also some of the things that you heard people talking about here today. For example, when I look at a deal, if a company has a co-founding team, let's say there's 4 of them, and I like 2 of them a lot, and I think 2 of them have the depth to get the job done, and the other 2 I think are a little weak and getting carried by the former 2. My gut reaction might be, it's going to be too hard to separate the 4 and get just the 2, and I don't want to deal with that issue, and I'm going to move on. Because a lot of times I'm looking for more reasons to say no than I'm looking to say yes. Or I might say, well, I may go ahead and do it, but I'm going to spend a lot of time talking with you about what happens if somebody outgrows their job, for instance. Have you thought about how you're going to react as a team and how you're going to deal with each other? But on the other hand, if you come to me as an individual, I'm going to think, well, you lack depth. Where's your breadth? Where are you going to get it from? Who are you going to rely on? So in the end, the devil's in the detail, and it's your job as you approach an investor in whichever way you come to communicate not just the great idea, but also get out there about how the team's going to work together and complement each other. So the second question I was asked is, then what am I looking for? And clearly I'll put that in the context of the team or the founders versus in the broader business sense. I'm going to answer that question 2 ways. One with sort of a framework idea, and the second with some specifics. In a framework idea, I actually think a framing idea for me is that the challenge for the entrepreneur or entrepreneurs is often, in my mind, not getting the company off the ground, albeit it's hard. The challenge is getting the darn company to grow. And part of that, getting that company to grow, is your ability as a founder or founders to build a team so that the sum is greater than the division of the parts. And that's a little bit about recognizing talent, and that's a lot of bit about giving those other managers room to run, which I think is also the story that you heard with Matt and Mark. For whatever reason, how they got there, they surely trusted each other enough to give each other room to run. And so it's a clear kind of concrete criteria that I'm looking for is, do you as a management team have that capability? But it's a very difficult one to turn into some sort of formulaic metric. So if you ask me what I'm looking for, if you ask any venture investor what they're looking for on this topic, or if this topic matters, you're more likely to get them to wax on philosophical, and they're going to speak about point views of problems that they have had or not had. But if I were to be more specific, and I think this applies to whether you're a founding team or a founder plus team, you have to have complementary skills, and a lot of times that automatically leads to a suggestion of division of roles. But your investors will want to know who's responsible for what and why and how this group's going to function. And so that has to be there. You'd like unique vantage points, so kind of come at life from different viewpoints. We would expect a more rich view about how to deal with both good situations and bad situations. Functional breadth, market knowledge, does a team possess that and complement each other? Because there appear to be teaming skills, and you can even pick this up on how they work together in pitching the idea to you or helping you through the diligence process. And then there's kind of other lesser things about network of contacts that can be brought to bear to get the company off the ground. And I would say that these are ideas and that you ought to contemplate yourself as you talk to each other about what you bring to bear to get the company off the ground and keep it growing. And then I would say then narrowly in the context of just a founding team, I've already brought up this point of what's your experience of working together in tough times? And that's why, the B-School buddy thing, you probably just had fun, or the undergraduate buddy things, maybe you just had fun together and you didn't see each other in the difficult pinch. And so I think a lot of the questions that Doug raised to ask each other are good ones on that sense. And then the second thing is you ought to look for openness to criticism. I mean, this business of getting a company off the ground is a lot of poking holes at the problems that confront you and, in fact, looking for problems where they don't exist so that you don't get blindsided. And if your partner is defensive, or if the founding team comes across as defensive, or one is defensive or not, then that starts to raise kind of radar signal issues with us. But in general, I'd say do it your own way, but get the detail right.
Thanks. Well, picking up on your last comment as well as on a comment that Doug made, what worries me as somebody who might want to go into business with a partner is that I have to be almost perfect. If I've got any flaws at all, like I'm stubborn or I have any sort of a temper or I might be the least bit controlling, I'm going to be a problem for my partner. Surely that can't be right. That's not the impression either that Doug or Michelle is trying to create. How would you address that? In other words, I guess another way of framing the question is, we're all normal and we all have our idiosyncrasies. How does one healthily approach a partnership recognizing those mistakes, and what can one do about a behavior pattern that has been ingrained for 25 or 30 or more years?
Well, all right.
That's got to be your question.
I really want to, in answering that, piggyback on some of the things you said, that in the course of this conversation, I don't think, I'm confident no one up here wishes to give disagreement a bad name. And in that sense, conflict within moderation, a bad name. The problem is finding the right answer. Disagreement is not the problem. Disagreement is the solution. And making a team get really effective at disagreeing is the only legitimate thing that team building should be directed to. Any team at any level has as its obligation to have decided better, having analyzed better than any one of them by themselves would have done. Disagreement is the royal road to that. And so that you have a hot temper, which you could have fooled me, Irv, but...
it's well hidden.
Yeah. But, and I want to know, how stubborn can someone be who reads Auden? I don't know. I just don't know.
It's 3 lines.
Oh, well, okay. Well, see, and he corrected me, see? So, okay. You do want to get that ethic established in the top team, first, foremost, and as fast as possible. That only as an obstacle to establishing that subculture in the top team is temper or harshness or the rest of this a problem. You can, with great difficulty, solve for the difficulties of a very harsh, but right a lot of the time CEO or founder, right? Right counts more than, Emily Post. And so if you can get that, if you can establish that subculture around the belligerence, harshness, whatever, and if that person is simply demanding and obnoxious, but responds visibly, openly, and well to constructive criticism, kind of always is operating on its, I bet I'm wrong. I really believe this, but I bet I'm wrong. Is always scanning the environment for something that is going to come and be important and figure it out before the competitor does, much less risk management. That's what, and so any of you could be stubborn and have terrible tempers and so on and so forth. The critical fact is, do you have just enough of that fundamental intellectual humility to model that? So because the culture of your company is going to trickle down from you as the CEO disproportionately, and from the top team absolutely. And so if you can establish that culture, you've got the beginning of a money-making culture. So people will start disagreeing effectively, cooperating across functions. It's not easy. Because you model it. So I'm repeating myself, forgive me. Disagreement is the solution, not the problem.
You're not looking for a perfect partner, because then there's some downside in that. If you're not, you don't ruffle feathers or whatever, well, then I'd be concerned that you're not going to drive enough for change. So I think it's a combination of what Doug and Michelle were saying. It's in the details, but make sure you look at each other's personality flaws and know where they'll inhibit and feel, and that make sure you have a plan for how to overcome that, and then also know where they'll be used to advantage. So again, stubbornness. If you're dogmatic about producing great quality products, and you to the point where that's more important than anything. Well, that's a disadvantage in some ways, but in other ways it's an advantage, and you just have to know how to take the good part of that and leave the bad part behind.
One other question, then we'll open it up. How important do you think chemistry is in a good partnership? Suppose I look at somebody else and intellectually we see eye to eye and our value systems are the same and our goals are aligned, but I just don't feel a certain closeness to that person, but his or her functional skills and mine are a perfect match and everything else is made in heaven, but somehow there's that chemistry element missing. How much should I listen to that?
I think my opinion is I would listen to that very much, and I would probably punt. I would not get into that relationship. And I think you spend a lot of time with that person, and that it's important that you enjoy some of that time. And I think it's important that you spend time, because a lot of decisions are made, going to dinner or driving to someplace, and if you're driving in separate cars, you're less likely to have those opportunities to talk about things. I think that's important. It's maybe not prohibitive, but I'm thinking people that I've worked closely with, and I just can't see that working that well.
I guess I would say is, be aware of the fact that there's a difference between respect and trust. And, at least as I heard between the lines in Matt's story, there's a lot about trust. I know in working with my own business partner, a lot of things work because we trust each other. Now, we also have the respect, but if it were just about respect, then maybe, those things on the margin that your gut speaks to you about that you're not sure is right or wrong and you want a thought partner on, that may be the places where you get stuck. And so I would say that is about the chemistry. It may be that, he likes to go out and drink beer, and, you'd rather drink root beer. I don't know what it is. It's not about necessarily you having fun. I think that's a different issue. And I think those things are important to think through.
Okay, we welcome your questions. Yes?
There's a lot of discussion around qualitative metrics, and I was wondering if there's any discussion of quantitative metrics. Getting a little bit to some ones. It seems like the founding team is
I'll give you from a venture perspective. You better all have a unabashed drive to succeed when all else is doomed. And if you can say that 100% on everything and everyone's attitude, I'd say you've got a darn good fighting chance. I'm not sure the perfect answer is out there. If there was a perfect answer, if there were these metrics, we could just cookie cutter these things out there, and Intel would be a lot like HP, which would be a lot like Texas Instruments, which would be a lot like GE, and they're all very different.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing too, the quantitative, I don't see a lot of quantitative measures in picking a partner because a lot of it is about chemistry and a holistic approach. And some of your questions, I think I'm not clear whether they're about partners or about putting together a management team. I mean, I think the more you're getting away from the chemistry of a partnership, you can maybe be a little bit more quantitative. But that gives me a thought to swing back to what we said before. Is I think a partnership of two is, as we talked about, I think a viable approach to one. I think as soon as you start adding more people, three is much more difficult. Four is exponentially more difficult. It just keeps going from there. So my personal view is, and you actually be interested in someone who has more data, is when there's 5 co-founders, that's usually they aren't 5 partners, and you really should get it down to 2. Or 1, or you're much more likely to have this conflict sooner rather than later.
Was that in part a question about?
I guess it was just so much focus on the non-founder issue. I kind of agree with what Kate was saying, or somebody said, have one person sort of in charge. But getting beyond that, assuming one person is in charge, there's still a lot that determines whether you're going to be successful. My experience has been you do need somebody who's more product focused, someone more sales focused, maybe somebody QA or customer service focused. And my assumption would be, even though there's a lot of quality and chemistry that goes into it, understanding what the quantitative metrics of the person involved in the jobs is very important to the success of the venture.
You must have some sort of model or like a computer model or something.
I do, but I'm very covetous of it, and I'm not going to share it.
However, for a fee.
Yeah.
No, but there's a specific project emerging that I thought was working.
That has to do with human resources models and different cultures created by human resources policies in the 170 technology-based companies being studied. It really doesn't have to do with functional diversity, if you will, or the way people are applied to tasks. I'm not intimately familiar with it, but I'm somewhat familiar with it. Other questions?
Matt, you described a situation where you and Mark had any given situation where you had disagreement. It almost sounded like you guys would just sort of hash it out informally, and it was almost the one who felt the least passionate about it sort of acquiesced at some point. I'm wondering, did you ever have an explicit discussion up front before you even got into that first disagreement about some sort of formal method that you would put in place to come to an agreement when you did have disagreements?
Well, I think this idea of the one who gives in, was really more of a, that's multiple steps down the line. I think we had a lot of other balances in terms of we respected the other person. We thought they bring different opinions. So most of the times it was done through, a open, intellectually honest approach of, let's get more data if we're disagreeing. And it was really more of the subjective things where I think we got to that point. I'd say the one area we did, it was around I was the CEO and he was the president, which implied some level of, that I had the final say. But it's sort of like a nuclear deterrent. I think when you really get to that point, it's, you don't want to go there. So we tried to stay away from that as much as we could.
Peter?
In a situation where you have, let's say, 3 founders, and you fundamentally believe one is less valuable, in your, not as a person, but
Stanford.
to the actual company you're building, how do you go about assessing that value? And actually trying, if you're going to have, in a sense, 2 founders that are probably equal, and one that's going to be less as far as actual probably responsibility and compensation.
compensation?
Well, that's probably easy. That's actually.
Are you talking about equity?
Sheer equity for, yeah, between the three founders.
Openly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just you have to agree that both of you have to have that same model. And if one of you feels like you're not that much less equal, and then it's not gonna work.
And I think the sooner in the process, the better. If you get down the road part way and there's a mismatch of expectations, such as the third person thinks that she or he is equal, then there's some undoing to work on there, which is very difficult. So I think the sooner, openly and being intellectually honest about it and talking, it's almost to me analogous to raising a child. You don't say to the child, you're bad because your room is dirty. You say, we have this dirty closet here. Let's get after it. And so it's the closets that's the problem. So it's not the individual, as you posited in the beginning. You said this. Who's the problem? It's the skill set or whatever the other, functioning shortcoming is. Not in him or her, but in how he or she functions. And I think the sooner you get that out and then say, does this still work to you, even though we might divide the founding interest in the company 40-40-20, is that still okay with you? Are you comfortable with that? And I mean, I think that's going to be a very difficult discussion, but it's more difficult the longer you wait.
Another thing that can happen with the delay is not just that you run aground on the two of us really think, or I really think that you, the third person, don't have the skill in your area of expertise that you think. That's kind of what we're presuming as we talk about this, I think. But also what can happen is you uncover that you view the business in a fundamentally different way. What are the demand characteristics of succeeding here? And that person thinks the business is such and such, and there's really not that much to speak. He's really great at so-and-so, she. But turns out we're not sure, the two of us over here, or you, are not sure that's really that important. And this view of the business, it can be the sleeper. So talking about what do we think this is really about? What's going to make this a success? Because there aren't formulas, right? Who should be on board and what their attributes should be vary with what's the task to be done, and that varies with the market and what you're trying to do.
I think there are some formulas. I mean, you can resort sometimes to the market a little bit, or at least to some data that makes the discussion a little bit easier. And you can say, if we had to replace ourselves in these positions, how would we compensate them, and what skills would we look for? What experience would we look for? And I think it's only fair to yourselves as owners and to your partners and investors that you're trying to make money for to look at it that way. So sometimes you can approach it that way. Or split the difference between being a founder and holding this particular position. Well, as a founder, we all get X, but for these positions, we get Y, and if we had to replace ourselves, this is what we'd pay for that. There's a fair amount of data on compensation, and you can use that sometimes to make it more of an objective perspective, which is really what it probably is, because it's not a comment on the person.
Well, that surely works for compensation, but that would be less difficult or more difficult to do with equity. And I would think a lot more of the tension is in how do you divide the equity, even between two people. Then that's where the rub would come.
I think these issues go much more than equity. I think you're highlighting an extreme case where one has more value than the other, and I think even in equal partnerships, one thing we did that I didn't mention before that someone suggested to us and I thought was a good idea is try and dig up all the muck. So even if you're equal partners and you decide you're going to split it 50-50, which is what we did, you still have concern. You still have areas where you feel like you're stronger than the other person, or and I think it's important to bring those out because that will highlight the tensions that will come up later. So it's great to talk about. I'm worried that you might, you're not going to scale particularly well in this job, or your behavioral tendency to do this or that might be a problem, and you hear back from the other things, and if you're at each other's throats just over that theoretical exercise, then that tells you a lot. If you can figure out how to constructively work out of those, then that gives you a good indication of, well, okay, now let's, talk about that when we're really in a situation and it's 100 times worse.
And just to put another frame on this, too, I really listened hard to the questions that Doug put out there, and I thought, if everyone that walked into the room asking me to invest had talked about that, those kind of questions, founding team or founder plus team, the business plans I evaluated, the business ideas would be far more concrete. Because usually where a business falls apart in the diligence is that they can't articulate what happens with the second product and when will investment happen in a big way, and what about the third, and are we a product company, are we a services company, what if someone gave us a lot of money to shift positions. That actually causes you to think very tactically about your strategy, which brings a level of crispness to a business plan that the vast majority don't have. And it's sometimes a difference between why I can do diligence in 2 to 3 weeks on a deal versus some deals that I spend 3 months on. Because I'm trying to help pick that apart with them. And so there's kind of another reason in terms of just the quality of the endeavor you're going after. And I think it's also a right framing issue to get to a lot of these, more difficult kind of personal questions that are hard to raise and ask of each other. An easy avenue into it.
Just a postscript.
One founder, 3 team members, and he gave them co-founding titles and said, hey, why don't we just call you a co-founder, because you sort of put some time in, even though you hadn't left your job before you joined. But there was a defined division there. And the founder actually had more equity as well, which just kind of underscored the fact that, yeah, we're a team, and you have a founder title, and that's cool. And it actually motivated them a lot. And when the time the company got acquired, 3 of the founders were still there, and one his job had outgrown him, and it was messy but manageable. But if you looked at that as an example of where a 4-person founding team worked, you would be misguided, and you wouldn't know otherwise by looking at the titles. So I would say take care a little bit that data can work against you.
This kind of follows up on the previous question. What if the idea is based totally on one person's product research? Like in my case, I'm going to start a company based on my PhD research, and wondering if I should do it by myself because it's like my idea, or should I find somebody else, and I'm not sure what other person to find, and whether they will get equal status as me, and I mean how will the labor be divided, because I'm also in a position, I feel, to be the best person to pitch about the idea, because it's ultimately it's what I've been working on for so long. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I would say that you really ought to call the tune and take sort of one step at a time in talking, develop a number of alternatives for yourself, talk with a lot of different people, and talk about different configurations of working together with each of those people. And I think if you develop enough alternatives, the odds are reasonably high that you'll find somebody that you want to work with, and then based on that bond, if you will, that you strike, the way the relationship takes shape will become more obvious than it is in talking about it in the abstract.
I think you have to follow what Doug said. You're the founder right now, so you have this idea, and you need to think, how can I make it successful?
Right.
And in that journey, if you figure out, well, I actually am, this is some science-based idea. I bring the science or technology, but I don't know about the business. Then you go out and you look to get that business expertise, and you can come up with structures where you find someone who is, junior to you if you feel like you can manage that overall business responsibility. But you might go in and find, gosh, I just don't know about this, and that stuff is as hard as what I'm doing, and I need someone who's an equal partner, and you won't do that until you find that person who you get really excited about. But I think it really starts from in you and saying, what honestly can I do and can't I do?
And I wouldn't rule out the possibility, picking up on a comment that Doug made earlier, a self-assessment, that you might decide you don't want to be part of the management of this venture either. That's not really what you're cut out to do. I don't know you. I'm not.
Or that you're the junior partner, too, which is that maybe you say, hey, this is to make this work. I need someone else who's got a lot more, and I'm willing to be the
But
CTO.
you won't know any of this until you strike up a number of conversations with possible people with whom you could affiliate.
I have a client who we talked over the course of a year, and he actually invited someone in to replace himself as the CEO. He had grown this thing to 8 or so million, and it had plateaued, and it wasn't just the market's fault. And there were a limited number of things we could do coaching him about his management style. The ultimate truth was he was a deeply technical guy, just phenomenal, and that he taught himself an astonishing amount about running a business successfully. Be all that as it may, you kind of add up what was going on around this company. It was time. And it's that sense of self-insight that I think we're all talking about. What does it take? What's going on, especially in the environment? What's it going to take to respond to that and stay afloat, or maybe even control it? And who am I? What do I bring to the party? What does complementarity look like in colleagues for me, including maybe I'm the number 2? It is a daunting question because it's so fundamental about who am I, and I wish you the best of luck. You may come out with insight you're glad you have.
I have 2 questions, but I'll hang on to the other one later and see if there's enough time. Peter, you said how difficult it is to design a partnership and how important it is to have outside advisors. And I was wondering, are you talking not just spouses, right?
Right.
Like therapists, lawyers, coaches, sometimes, and not just for you, but you're the one who brought that up. I'm interested in hearing from the panel on, what's your take on that during that process, and be able to bring meetings and facilitate dialogue.
Well, whatever works, I think, is the answer. Whomever you can listen to, and hopefully maybe your partner can listen to. I think if you have shared advisors, whether those be board members or investors or friends maybe makes it more too complicated, but if you have shared advisors, it helps. But you yourself should really have advisors, people who've been through it before. It might be clergy, in my case it was board members and investors, and some of both. I think you need probably a couple. I'd be interested to hear what other folks say, but I think you just need someone that you can really listen to and can give you perspective. And I think a lot of people in this room will be harder on themselves in a lot of ways than other people would be. And I think that's great. That is part of the motivation and drive that will make you very successful. But I think it helps to have that perspective, too.
Doug has done quite a bit of executive coaching. You might want to comment on that question.
Thank you, Irv. This is a hopelessly self-interested question, and I can't thank you enough for asking
it. Is our agency agreement still in effect?
Only if I get access to that formula first. There are a number of things that are worth, I believe, doing, and by no means am I the only organizational consultant and psychologist on the block. One thing that I alluded to that I think is extremely valuable is to have someone do a profile of you and the people who are going to be on the team with you. You will not, if it's done well, learn anything new about yourself. The point is not, you don't want esoterica because you're just doing business. You want the kind of things that someone who is open-minded and objective and has worked with you for 6 months or more would say about you and your ability and your approaches. And similarly with the other parties. The pay dirt is not in the report because, on the other hand, you'll be in the perfect position to decide whether it's accurate or not, right? Because if there are surprises, it means the psychologist, the organizational consultant is wrong.
So this is 360 degrees.
No, this is sit down for 3 hours, do a problem-solving exercises, samples of problem-solving, an interview, personality instrument. I once worked for an international firm that actually used the Rorschach. I'm not kidding. And they got away with it. And don't get me started. So, it creates a common language for you and the other people you're going to work with. The presumption is everyone in this has flat sides. The purpose is twofold. One is to identify the strengths so that they are deliberately and intelligently exploited and no one gets to take them for granted, even though they get boring for some people sometimes. And secondly, and the limitations, how to negotiate, how to circumvent the sand traps in what we both are not so good at, and where we're likely to come to some loggerheads. This is kind of not really ultimately pretty predictable. Let's just get this on the table. So the second objective is to get, in no-fault language, this description of you and the other key parties on the table in a dialogue so that the consultant can go away and you can continue managing this relationship like you'd manage any other asset by being able to approach it directly. Walk into his or her office and say, you know, last Thursday you were doing that again, weren't you? And they'll know what you're talking about. And you will be able to manage it and project forward based on those snapshots of abilities to how's the changing business going to require different things and who's got them. Does anyone have them? But it's, again, that open-mindedness and humility that we're here not to be best friends. We're here to make some money. And the key to that is exploiting each other's talents intelligently and talking and being able to talk about those. That's one. Another one is getting someone to help the team install the culture of speaking on time with candor and diplomatically, as we've been talking about up here. And that can be done in various ways. I won't belabor how I go about doing it. But the let's go climb ropes are all this stuff that I have to sell against where someone's done it before. And they hate it, and they're not sure why they're talking to an organizational consultant because they just hated that outward bound thing, and so would I. No, that's not what we're about. It's not becoming best friends. It's installing deliberately this ability to disagree in a really powerful way and make people obligated to listen and then participate. That's another thing. That be done for the team as a whole. And then conflict. Let's hope you don't have conflict. But yeah, you can. There are people who can help. There are things to be done.
I was just going to add a perspective from that as a founding partner perspective, or from serving on some boards where we've had this issue. If it's a business that's got outside funding and that's kind of the business entity is what you want to preserve. It's not a small partnership. It's the board's job to figure that out, because the issue isn't, this is one of these cases where it's different than a marriage. This isn't about, this is between the two of you, you figure it out. You've got a business there, and it's the board's determination is, because oftentimes it's pretty painfully clear to everyone but the one person, who is causing the problem that what the right answer is. And if that's the case, the board can solve it. I think there are also cases where it's not clear who, the founders or the partners are each doing different things. That's when boards bring in outside consultants to say, hey, we can't answer this. We don't have enough insight into the organization.
Can I piggyback on that and disagree respectfully? See, we're modeling here.
It's good, then we'll gang up on you.
Yeah. Boards notoriously do that way too late. So I go back to what I was saying up front. Take as a principal goal being able